Diolch Donna.
Diolch Hazel. Prynawn da. Good afternoon everybody. My name's Donny Hughes. I'm the Health and Safety Manager for Ceredigion County Council. Thank you for Hazel for inviting me to speak to you today about risk assessments and points to consider to help you open your building safely. As Hazel mentioned, first things first, we need to ensure that the building is clean and safe for people to enter and to use. So I will share some of the more important areas you need to consider for your building as a checklist, as a risk assessment, under the first phase of reopening your community venue. You may notice a pattern. Hazel's already mentioned it and repeated it as we go through. The main pointers to try and reduce the risk of infection and to keep everywhere safe and clean, again, is high levels of hygiene, maintaining social distancing, and keeping everything safe to protect anybody who uses the building, including yourselves. I shall start talking a little bit first about Legionella. So if your building has been vacant over the last few months and nobody's been going through to flush toilets or run the hot water and cold taps, etc., we need to think about the water systems and the risk of Legionella, which is especially dangerous this time of year as the water in our pipes, etc., warm up where Legionella likes to thrive. If somebody's been going in and flushing through the system and you have proof of this, any planned maintenance that should have been carried out, etc., may still have carried on, then you don't need to worry too much about this. But for those buildings that have not had any documented flush-throughs or any other generic upkeep, a competent person, so unfortunately we're looking at outside agencies, competent companies must come in and test and disinfect the system before you should be allowed to reopen. At the end of the day, Legionella is a nasty infection and quite similar effects as COVID-19. It's a type of pneumonia again. If we look at fire safety, we have got Emma Thomas here to sort of clarify and go into a bit more extra information. So I'll just touch on basic fire safety you need to think about with your building being shut for a little while. If you have a logbook, I hope you have, making sure it's up to date. So any weekly lighting, alarm checks have been carried out. If you've got your fire doors, make sure they're still working, they shut properly as they should and seal properly. Your fire extinguishers, if they've been checked and serviced as they should. And thinking about when we reopen, if we have to think about one-way systems, separate exits and entrances, if that's going to impact on an emergency evacuation in the event of fire as well. We look at general building safety, if nobody's been around, making sure the lighting's still working, the flooring's in good condition. The general electrics for kettles, boilers, things like that are all in good working order. They're still within their maintenance checks. And they're working as they should. Everything's clean and tidy. Nothing needs any extra maintenance or fixing before your building can open again. Have to think about toilets because this is where people are going to have access to their hand washing areas. Again, so important as part of the three main issues we have to think about. Access to good hand washing is vital. If you've got smaller toilets, you might have to think about a one in, one out, even if you've got 2 or 3 cubicles in there. Signage will be needed to remind of hand washing, making sure it's 20 seconds. And the toilet to be cleaned regularly by whichever routine you see fit. You have to make sure as well before opening you've got enough soap and paper towels, if at all possible. I mean, paper towels are preferable to hand dryers to reduce infection. Another thing to think about if you have sort of first aid signs, etc. If you've got any of your team, any regular volunteers that help with the upkeep of the building, if they're if they're not feeling safe enough to come into the building, they might be shielding, might be nervous about coming back because they've got underlying health conditions. If they're your nominated first aider for the building, you may have to think about perhaps having somebody else to come in and assist and be trained up to do that. Ventilation is another thing we have to think about. We like to make sure that we've got plenty of windows open, try to avoid airy circulation systems and fans. So open windows, keep the fresh air flowing. If you've got the smaller rooms, etc., very small rooms where social distancing can't be adhered to, perhaps not use them so much if at all possible. I think later on we're going to be talking a bit more about signage, so floor markings to remind us about social distancing, reminding us about hand washing routines, and if we need any more potential new evacuation routes in the event of a fire or something. And before the building is opened, we need to think as well, has the building been thoroughly cleaned before we open up to allow public to come in to use it? With the nice weather, as well as all the thunder and lightning and rain we've had, have a look outside the building. If anything's overgrown, if any of the paving slabs, etc., have rucked up that could cause a slip, trip or fall hazard, any sort of the outside of the building, if it's degraded, making sure your outside lights are working as well, because the nights are starting to draw in now. So making sure that we've got lighting outside for security and safety reasons as well. Your parking provision may need to be reviewed to have a look to see if social distancing can be adhered to with people potentially driving up and coming out of their cars at the same time. Hazel has spoken briefly about risk assessments, etc. So we are looking at developing a template to assist and give some food for thought, though you may have additional concerns you need to address or put in place additional control measures that we haven't even mentioned here today. But this building part of the risk assessment must be in place before you open the building for use. These risk assessment templates are there for you to refer to or use if that's what you want to do, unless you want to use your own. The second part of your risk assessment is based on your employees and volunteers and the day-to-day running of the building. So not the people coming in to carry out the activities, but for you to protect yourself, anybody else who works there, including the volunteers. So have a think about any PPE, especially if there's going to be areas of work where you can't adhere to 2 meters social distancing. You may need to consider face coverings, face masks. If you're going to be cleaning down the areas regularly, which you should be, you may want to use gloves and aprons to protect your skin from long-term exposure to cleaning chemicals, etc. Although we haven't got a cleaning specialist in the group or the panel helping today, if you do have any cleaning specific questions or concerns, we can ask the council's cleaning manager for advice, and we'll feed back to you later on if you need any more support with that. Hand sanitizer must be made available where access to hand washing facilities may be restricted. So for example, if we do have the one person in, one person out, it might be a little bit more difficult for people to be going in and washing their hands as thoroughly as we'd like them to, even though hand washing is more important than using hand sanitizer. Hand sanitizer's there where we can't be washing our hands as often as we'd like to. And bins with lids on must be made available in line with the catch it, bin it, kill it, like the flu precautions we take in the winter, that they need to be, if people are coughing or sneezing, they need to be putting it into a tissue paper, and they need to be able to have access to a bin. On this risk assessment, as part of your safety checklist, we would want to see some sort of reference to cleaning protocols, what should be put in place, deciding on how often cleaning, regular decontamination needs to take place based on your activities, what sort of age range of people you're having go in there, etc. You might have to think about the seating you've got, if you've got stage curtains, etc., that are fabric and harder to clean. It might be worth you sort of putting them away at the moment and using the seating and chairs and tables, etc., that are easy to wipe down with disinfectant and cloths. So if the cleaning duties are not discharged to the hirers who are coming to use it, you'll need to ensure the individual responsible, so that's yourselves, for example, you've got a schedule of hires and sufficient time allocated in between hiring times to carry out these cleans. I've already spoken about using the correct liquids and hand sanitizer, etc., which we can get some advice for you on that as well. Think about your bins, your extra waste that might be generated from gloves, aprons, people using tissues and using your bins, etc. So have a little think about your bins, where you're going to store them, etc. Think about the staff and your employees, making sure that if any of them are vulnerable for whatever reason, you're taking extra precautions to protect them. Make sure also that anybody who's working with you whether they're paid, whether they're volunteers, family members who come in to help you out, make sure that they don't attend if they've got any of the symptoms. So that's your fever, your new persistent cough and recent loss of taste and smell, and to follow the Public Health Wales guidance on isolation and testing. If they do become unwell whilst they're in the building with you, they need to go home immediately and follow the same Public Health Wales guidance. If, it might be sensible to make sure that after they've left, that you make sure that the area in which they've been working is disinfected down afterwards as well. Your staff, while they're there, it could be that they're doing the initial deep clean before you open up. Make sure they bring their own flasks of tea and coffee, etc., so they're not sharing anything communal at the moment. This can be reviewed in time, if infection rates and risks reduce, etc. So as I said earlier, we're developing a risk assessment template, or a few of them, to give you some guidance and support to complete these assessments, which we would like to see to make sure that you've considered everything that's needed and perhaps offer you additional support if required. So we're here to help you look over them before the building opens to ensure everything's been considered. Everything considered that to keep you safe, but also your family at home safe, your community safe, and anybody else who's using these buildings as well. So that's pretty much all that I've got to say. I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
Good afternoon, my name is Ailagor Thomas from Mid-West Wales Fire and Rescue Service. My role is the Head of Operational Response for Ceredigion Command. I'll take a moment just to go through the advice that our Business Fire Safety Department is providing to businesses and services as they look to reopen after lockdown. Rhai ar cyngor un mewn Saesneg heddi, so I'll be going through this advice in English today and expanding upon some areas that Donna has just updated us on. So, in advance of reopening your respective community venues or facilities, there are a few things from a fire safety perspective that you may wish to consider during phase 1, so it's making your building safe. Fire risk assessment. The responsible person for the building will be the owner of the fire risk assessment. So on your return to the venue prior to reopening, it may be necessary to review your fire risk assessments to ensure that it's current and reflects the way your facility will now operate. It's essential that assessments are undertaken and reviewed where there are significant changes in the way of working, by the processes or in building layout as a result of the COVID measures that you may put in place. Means of escape. Ensure that your escape routes remain available and open correctly. Remember, in your absence and due to a lack of activity, doors, etc. may have seized up while not in use. So routine maintenance is required there. If you share an escape route, that other business or property may not be open, so they should be supported with adequate escape signage and lighting to identify the escape routes in the event they're used in an emergency. Arson, like Donna just said, now there will be an increase in rubbish, refuse if you like, as a direct result of your COVID measures. For example, using paper hand towels instead of the hand dryers. So you will experience an increase in rubbish generated. Therefore, care is to be taken when dealing with your waste, as rubbish is accumulated outside the building and provides a potential target for arson, which could damage your property as an unintended consequence of the measures put in place. Training. In light of potential changes to the way in which you operate post-lockdown, you may wish to consider providing refresher training to your volunteers and staff, reminding them and ensuring that they know what to do in the event of a fire situation, particularly in an instance where maybe no one's been to the building for the last 5 months. If those people with specific tasks are not returning, ensure that other suitably trained people are available, whilst also considering the needs of lone workers and their fire safety within your building. And maintaining fire safety measures. So, whilst you've been closed, you've maintained your premises fire safety measures, fire alarms, fire extinguishers, and emergency lighting. So timely maintenance is vital for the safety of your premises and those that use it. So ensure that in the absence of anyone going in, all your features are tested and maintained prior to reopening. So just one or two other things to consider now. to ensure that your premises is safe for your volunteers and members of the public. So again, escape routes and exits. Ensure that any COVID one-way systems that you may put in place don't obstruct or hinder recognised fire escape routes and exits that you have in the building. Fire doors. Fire doors are a critical element in the fire safety of a building, and they're to protect people and the property. Don't be tempted to wedge open your doors as a precaution against touching door handles. Holding fire doors open with unsuitable devices is not permitted. So as a mitigation against COVID, you must ensure that you provide the adequate hand sanitisation instead. Fire alarms, ensure you test regularly, ensure that they are working before reopening. Testing and maintenance may have slipped during lockdown. Fire extinguishers. Fire extinguishers must be in full working order and legally compliant. These are the most recognisable forms of fire safety equipment and usually represent the first line of defence in the event of fire. Again, testing schedule may have slipped during lockdown. If you have any extinguishers which have passed their expiry dates, please ensure that you contact your established fire safety and protection provider to ensure that everything is in test ahead of opening back up to your communities. Fire risk assessments, which covered this earlier, and fire safety arrangements. The law stipulates the person responsible for the assessment in your building must review it regularly, make sure it's up to date. So you may wish to review it and amend specifically to your venue, reflecting the measures taken for COVID and any impact upon fire safety precautions that you put in place. And finally, training. If you haven't undertaken staff training for some time, which I suspect may be the case in some of your locations due to lockdown, on your return, ensure that all staff know what to do in the event of a fire situation. And if those people with specific tasks don't return post-lockdown, then please ensure that other suitably trained staff are available. So what I've just explained to you now will be available on our external website. And once we've got the literature made up, I will look to get copies to this group for dissemination to yourselves. Diolch yn fawr.